protection works in Calaveras County. So a lot of what you're going to hear tonight came out of the things that I learned. And what I learned largely was that it's amazing that we have the level of service we do, considering how little resource our agencies have. When I started being involved, I basically first volunteered to work on what's called a breathing support unit, which is a big truck that has a compressor on it that refills the air bottles after the firefighters go into a structure during a structure fire. And there's only one mobile air support unit in the county, so I ended up going to fires in Copperopolis, up in the Arnold area, up to West Point, Valley Springs, all over the place, and seeing who was there when major incidents happened. Typically, when there's a structure fire, you need at least 5 engines or more to do all the things that need to be done during a fully involved structure fire. And so that means that no single fire agency can do it, because at most of these agencies have one engine that they're able to staff at a time. So typically that means that if there's a fire in Angels Camp, that means people from Murphy's and San Andreas and Copperopolis and Altaville Maloney's are all going to be there helping out as well. There's always multiple agencies. And I think we live in a county where there's a real struggle sometimes to come to a consensus on how to solve our problems. And I think it's just because Calaveras County, the different communities are very different. And fire service is a rare place where we actually work together very well. Some of the districts have less money and some have more. I come from one of the poorer ones. We only had, when I started, we only had about $240,000 a year in reliable revenue. So we were all volunteers. We had one paid fire chief. The rest were volunteers that we paid small stipends to work shifts at the station. But as time has gone on, it's been difficult to keep those volunteers because they grow up and they want to get jobs. So we're constantly training new firefighters. And I found out that this pattern is actually typical of the fire districts all over Calaveras County. They're heavily dependent on volunteers. It's more difficult to hold on to the ones that have 5 or 10 years experience because they're in demand. Firefighters are a valuable skill, and they go to the big cities, or they go to Cal Fire, or they go to some other career. That's right. So I'm going to try not to make any. Did you? Okay, thank you. So Measure A is a county-wide measure for Calaveras County. It's a 1-cent sales tax. It's on the ballot on November 8th, and that means that you'll be getting your ballots in early October. And the reason that we want to do this is because we want to protect Calaveras County by keeping our fire stations staffed. Let's see here. Volunteer firefighters originally in Calaveras County were the top people in the towns. They were the business owners that actually owned the buildings. So San Andreas, there's a newspaper story I showed a copy of, burned down in 1858. And in response to that, the business owners formed a fire, basically they called it an association, and they paid for the honor of being part of the crew that would go to the cisterns and haul buckets of water to control the fires. And the reason they were doing this is because they were the prominent owners of the businesses, and they would lose their inventory and lose their buildings when there were fires. Initially, fires were the only thing that they dealt with. It's obvious that in 160 years, things have changed a great deal. I think that one of the biggest changes in the United States is that we had policies that allowed many of us to become homeowners, basically especially after World War II and the GI Bill, many of us became homeowners, and so we had to have insurance in order to have mortgages. And when you have insurance companies that come sniffing around and asking, do you have a fire station within 10 miles? Do you have a water source? Things like that. That gradually forced the fire districts to evolve into something that was more than just a voluntary association only for the owners of the buildings who were members. Firefighters now also handle medical emergencies. In fact, about 2/3 of the calls are medical calls that we respond to every year. You know, that's who does CPR in many cases, who does stops the bleeding if there's an accident, has the tools to get people pried out of vehicles if they're crushed in vehicles. The other thing is that firefighters now have to have a lot of training. It's a state licensed job, basically. You have to have a lot of training and meet certain standards in order to do it. So who volunteers now? A lot of them are very young. We get 18, 19, 20-year-olds who come and train. This is a picture from a training at San Andreas Fire a few years ago. Once they're fully trained, many of the districts, and my district does this, we pay them small stipends to stay overnight at the station. But we can't pay them a living wage, because if we paid them a living wage, then they would be employees. And we can't afford to pay them a living wage because that would be more money than we currently have. The stipends vary. A lot of them are around $100 at most of the districts. Is that what it is here in Copper? Do you know?
You just went from 50 to 150.
It's 150. Okay, so we've been trying to increase the stipends for 24-hour shifts.
Altaville was $50 a day.
Yeah, Altaville was $50. So it's really nothing that they can live on. So a lot of them are, like I said, young people. Many of them still living with their parents. So turnover is high. Once they have experience, they move to other jobs. There's a few retirees and older adults who volunteer, but like I am not one who is willing to drag hoses into houses. Becky's husband, however, is. He's actually pretty close to me in age, and he does do the full firefighter job. So we have people in their 60s doing that. We have one of our water tender operators at San Andreas who's in his 70s. So it's truly a community effort, but we tend to be at the young and the old ages ranges. So how can they afford to do it? The fact is they can't. Not for long. This picture was taken from the backyard of my house in May of 2020. Not the next door house, but 2 doors up from me was an old wooden Victorian that was, it had decayed, the paint had faded, and it was in not good shape. Nobody was home, fortunately. We didn't know that because an elderly gentleman with some mobility issues lived there. But this fire, I was very lucky. It happened on a Tuesday night. And Tuesday night is training night at San Andreas Fire. So that meant everybody was there. So within just a few minutes, we had 2 engines there and enough firefighters to make entry. The making entry wasn't so much to try to save the structure, because this structure was going to go, but to check the house to make sure that the man wasn't in there. So we were very fortunate to have 2 engines and plenty of water and plenty of people to do that. He wasn't inside, so there was no danger. So they got out and they did what they would call protection to keep the heat from hurting the neighbor's house and to get it under control. So when 911 is dialed, dispatchers send the nearest resources. And that's not just in case of Copperopolis. It's not going to be just copper. If you have a structure fire, a full dispatch is going to include engines from neighboring agencies. 1 fire engine crew is not enough to handle a fully involved structure. It's typically about 5 engines and 17 firefighters, and my street was full of equipment that night for quite a while. Engine crew sizes vary. I'm going to get into that in a little more detail later. The National Fire Protection Association, the standard is to have 4 firefighters. And the reason they want to have 4, well, there's actually 2 reasons. One is if you're doing CPR, it's a lot more viable when you have at least 4 firefighters, because has everybody here has had a chance to try to do CPR? You know how exhausting it is. It's really good to have a team so you can switch out. The other reason is the 2 in, 2 out rule. If you get to a structure fire and you need to make an internal attack to save that property as much as possible, you can't do that safely until you've got 2 fully suited firefighters to stay out for every 2 that go in. 2 can go in, but 2 need to remain out in case the 2 that go in get in trouble and need to be extracted. So if you only have 2 on an engine, then you have to wait for a second engine to get there to make entry. So the National Fire Protection Association recommendation is 4. The minimum they recommend is 3, but in fact, most of the places here in Calaveras County are only staffing 2. Or maybe they'll have 2 paid firefighters at best. There's 3 stations, I'm going to get into that have 2 paid firefighters. This particular one, these were all volunteers at the time. These were from San Andreas. These 3 were on this engine, and this was a wildland crew that was working on a strike team. The state of California, when they hire the local fire engines to go work on the strike teams, they require at least 3 firefighters to be on there to do that. That's considered the standard for the wildland fires. So in the summer, when wildland fires are common, a lot of agencies try to have at least 3 firefighters available on the engines. Let's see, I think that covers that aspect of it. Okay, fire stations in Calaveras County. I didn't even get them all, but these are all locations of fire stations. So when you look at this, you think, that's a lot of fire stations. But who is actually on duty? Those 3 stations are the only ones where there's 2 or 3 firefighters, paid firefighters on duty at all times. This has turned out to be important because most fire stations try to have additional firefighters who are interns or trainees or volunteers or reservists to fill out the engine. So they might have 1 or 2 paid firefighters, but then they'll have some of the reservists or the interns as well. This year has been notorious for losing those interns and those reservists because they've been getting jobs. Yes, sir?
The 3 fire stations, which ones are they?
This is a county map, and so we're seeing Arnold, Hathaway Pines, and Angels Camp.
You're saying CDF. Is that CDF?
No, these are not CDF. I'm only talking about local fire. So I'm going to talk about that. Yes. Yes.
We have 4 people on
4 paid. But you have 2 locations and one of them's a medic, right?
Well, we actually have
2 medics, right?
We have per diem, but we also have, we run an ABC shift.
Right,
That is paid. And there'll be a paramedic at station 1.
right,
And per diem medic will be at station 3.
right, yep,
Also, as far as I'm also on the board of okay, so I have a little bit of knowledge.
right,
Care how you people go one way or the other, but I'm here just to give some information. We do not pay our volunteers
okay,
unless they go out of county or OES deems an incident in our district after 12 hours of service, a disaster, then you get paid, okay? But we do pay a stipend, as you said, to what we call interns.
interns. Mhm.
We go to Columbia College every year, and then DESCO, JC. We bring those guys in, they work under the paid staff. And then CDF comes along in the spring and takes them out and trains
Yep,
them. We start all over again.
yep,
When I first started here, we used to have upwards of 38 volunteers, plus the paid staff. Things have changed. You know, we have the prison now where everybody who used to be on these strike teams that would come out with Andrews and been let out. The engine from Sierra, which is a mutual aid engine for us, had 2 people here. Had a captain and an inmate. There is some other inmates that are going through clearance. But definitely used to pull in here and there would be like 6 people. It was like a clown show. They would just pull out. We let so many people out with COVID. And those were the people that were low risk. They were very well trained. So, anyway, I'm not trying to steal your thunder. I've been in Copper for 4 years, so anything that you said that I'm sort of here, I don't want people to know.
thank you, Steve.
Can I ask why
Yes.
Copper isn't shown on this map?
Well, because at the time that I did this presentation, when I was talking to the chief in Copper, he told me that there was only 1 full-time paid firefighter at the station, that there were other fire personnel were in some other category.
Yeah, well, I think that is true in a sense because he is a full-time, but under him, you know, like,
Right. Right, so, right. And so I have a note on here that says the stations with paid firefighters often also have duty stipend paid volunteers, reserves, or interns, because everybody wants to have more than just the paid firefighter on the engine.
I mean, you could be a volunteer, like, it says it's volunteer, he's paid a stipend, but for the most part, volunteers, you know, like, on our phone here, we're notified by a cab, for instance, if you're out as a civilian and it comes up, you know, so-and-so.
Yep.
Going on. We respond in our own vehicles, and for going that, I wish we did get paid, because after 34 years, I'd be retired.
Yep.
Never got anything for gas, time to put away for drugs.
Yep.
But, anyway, the volunteers per se are not paid in cost. Now, some other
Right.
agencies in Calaveras, I think, Murphy's not pay a stipend, they will call, that's right.
The terminology tends to vary when I ask them this.
It raised the stipend recently because of the increase in gas. Some of these kids are driving from Modesto and down the valley, and they're basically spending their stipend on food and gas to protect us in the community. We didn't feel that was right.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so when I ran it by the chief at the time, he said it was accurate that there was only one fully paid firefighter, that the others were in some other category. So I apologize.
That is true, but I'm just saying, as a rule, volunteers are not paid.
Oh, okay. So then there's a bunch of districts that do staff 24/7, but do it only with volunteers or interns or trainees. And so that includes my district, San Andreas, West Point, Murphy's, and Altaville Malones. In Altaville Malones, it's an interesting thing because they have a very close relationship with Angels Camp and effectively operate with Angels Camp, but get paid a whole lot less when they work for Altaville Malones. And I shouldn't even use the word paid because stipends are technically not considered pay. I always get my knuckles slapped by the chiefs if I use the word pay, right, Steve? I mean,
Well, most of them, I think, have gas and us, you know, we're in codes.
yep.
State employee, and I don't know if John Robach, who is the chief of Angels and Altaville Malones, I don't know if that is.
Yes, the Angels Camp part is,
Okay.
but not Altaville Malones.
Yeah, I know, I actually talked to John, he was new firefighters a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
Talking about, I know ultimately the difference between the amount he gets for each one is just
It's a big difference.
embarrassing.
Well, and Angels Camp gets a very good deal because they pay like $50,000 a year to Altaville Malones, and then the Altaville Malones people assist with their calls. So the city essentially has two staffed engines rather than one, which is
They actually have three because they have CDF there also, you know, by the
right. Now, and I wanted to talk about CDF, which now calls itself CAL FIRE. That's a change over the years, but it used to be, right, the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, but now CAL FIRE. They are a big help when they're around, and they're around a lot, but they don't do certain things to the extent that the local fire districts do. The local fire districts have the tools to get you out of a car if you're in a car crash. The local districts have engines that pump a lot more water for structure fires. The CAL FIRE rigs are more oriented toward wildland fires, which is their main emphasis. And as it happened in 2020 and 2021, there's times when the CAL FIRE rigs in our area are largely allocated elsewhere because they have major events. And when that happens, they actually will hire the local districts to backfill, and they'll hire our engines, the local fire district engines, to cover for wildland fire service. And that just, yep, yep, So CAL FIRE helps when they're here, but they're not going to be here at certain times, and it's particularly times like this when we have some of the large major incidents elsewhere in the state. Yes?
Well, as I understand too, CAL FIRE doesn't respond to like Medicaid.
They do. No, they'll help us.
Not like they used to.
Okay.
Everyone re-rolled. A couple of years ago, they stopped at the pick and choose.
Okay. So I'm here. I appreciate hearing that, Steve, because our district, we are in a place where there's a hospital right there and the ambulance headquarters right there, and so we've had a very close relationship with those other institutions. So generally, the CAL FIRE people do come to the medical calls, but it's usually the local firefighters who take the lead in doing whatever needs to be done.
That's true. I mean, before they used to roll on everyone, and they have EMTs and everything.
Yep.
It kind of took me off a few years ago. I said something about that because they use our training room. Our training room is a 30 by 30, it's a large room similar to this. And they come down and use that all the time. It used to kind of take me off because all of a sudden they quit giving us the service that we could come used to years. Yeah, I know what I mean. I kind of thought everything happened. I mean, I think that's why it emphasizes how why this is more important to us as a county because the state is going to be less and less of a help for us in the future.
Yep. I agree, Stephen. And I've also looked at the trend in what we get paid when we let our local engines work for CAL FIRE. And they're trying to find ways to reduce that every year, it seems like. And that work, by sending our engines away, basically, we earn money that allows us to pay our bills. There's a lot of the districts that are actually very dependent on basically being fire mercenaries, going and fighting fires elsewhere in order to pay the bills here. Yep. Yep. When you can do it, though, I've known some of the districts this year have not been able to send strike teams because they didn't have sufficient staff to continue staffing at home and send the team. Okay. It's harder this year. So, forgive me, I'm going to jump ahead here. I did put one more. The red diamonds are stations that are staffed something less than 24/7, or they're completely vacant. And some of the completely vacant stations include one in Burson. There's $1 million homes around it. And one that's up in Dorrington, which is another place with both valuable real estate and significant demand for services at certain times of the year. There's one here, and when I say it's less than 24/7, that means that there's no paid firefighter there or staffed engine 24/7. I think there's a station, though, where you do have a medic all the time, right? Station 2, yeah.
We have a medic, we have two.
Right.
We're only required to have one when we did that initiative some years ago.
Right.
But with our budget, we were able to supply two. I'll tell you now, we're doing more back-to-back calls lately than we ever had in our life. We might be at a call, and all of a sudden something else breaks. We even have three of them stacked up on each other. And so by having the two paramedics go to the station, they'll peel off and go, you're still understaffed.
Yep.
And you have Sierra 99 come in as a mutual aid agent. Because years ago with the ISO rating, we were trying to bring that down because some people were starting to lose insurance.
Yep.
With that because of the response time. And so by going to Sierra and signing a mutual agreement with them, we were able to cut that, they like a 5-minute response.
Yep.
And it was a little hard meeting that from station 1, so parts of Corpus Flat, and then we have a resort that we have now to the county line.
Yeah. We did that too because we managed to improve our ISO rating about 7 or 8 years ago. And the way we did it was by starting to pay stipends to always have 24/7 firefighters at the station. But anyway, so the red diamonds are places where we could improve staffing if we had a way to do it. Most fire districts in the county lack adequate revenue. And this is a strike team. I think it's from maybe about 6 years ago, heading out from next to the town hall in San Andreas to go earn money to pay the bills. Now, the volunteers, one of the reasons they like the strike teams is temporarily, suddenly they're earning $30 an hour. So instead of being a volunteer that barely can pay the gas money to get to the station, they're actually getting paid full professional firefighter wages while they're on the wildland strike team. The state is paying for it. The state has the money. So yes, for that little time, suddenly you're a state resource. I mean, you're a local engine, but you're working for the state, and they're dispatching you and using you to do what they need to do.
But a lot of those stations, too, that send these guys out on these strike teams, Copper's not one of them. Because our guys will go out on the strike team, they'll come back 2 weeks later, they'll get their big paycheck. Some of these guys don't get paychecks until the fire's done and the bills are paid.
So, and it can be a 6-month delay. So we just in June paid some of our firefighters for work they did last fall. And they yeah, it's when the state pays the bills, and I can't explain the logic of it. It's slow. And no. Yep. Yep.
That kind of hurt it a little bit. And Copper's lucky in the sense that our revenue that we receive tax-wise, and then on the other initiative, the 75 supplement and the 75 fulfillment, we do okay enough. We don't, and in fact, when we do our budget, we don't factor in possible code 5 revenue.
And in fact, legally, you can't plan on it. You're supposed to base it on your reliable revenue. And if you were to plan on that revenue, you'd get smacked by the auditor, and it would not be good. Yes. Yes, it's two things. There's both the fee for the engine itself, and then the firefighters also get paid. And Steve might know better than I do, but it's significant. We send type 3s as typically what we send. But we actually are fixing up a type 6 because we could send that too, for that matter. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So anyway, as Steve has pointed out, the way to improve response is to have stations staffed and to have more places which are staffed, so that you have, because some of the larger districts, Copper is geographically one of the larger districts, as is Calaveras Consolidated and Ebbets Pass. And because they have a larger geographic area, one station can't provide a prompt response. So the plan, one of the reasons when we were working on this, and there was a lot of discussion between the citizens group and the fire districts, because we wanted to make this something that the fire districts could all support and live with, but that would meet the standards of the citizens group, who wanted accountability and who wanted to make sure that it was spent on the purposes that we wanted. We didn't want it to be misused. So our goal is to have at least 2 firefighters on duty in all the fire districts, even the small ones, because those of you in the larger districts like Copper still need those smaller districts like Altaville, Malones to be ready to go when you need them. Yes, ma'am. Yes, we're talking about 2 paid firefighters on duty. And in order to have 2 firefighters on duty 24/7, you're actually hiring 6, because in order to cover the shifts, typically they work 2 days on and 4 days off. Is a common pattern. Not everybody does it, but it's a common pattern. And in order to do that, basically you have to walk the math backwards. If you pay them something close to minimum wage, like $15 an hour, which is not a lot, it actually adds up to a living wage for firefighters, because after 40 hours, they get overtime. So even in that first 2 days, out of that 48 hours, 8 hours is overtime. And then some weeks, if you work 2 days on, 4 days off, there's another day within the same pay week. And that would be all overtime. So when you actually added up, a $15 an hour job, if you work full time as a firefighter, ends up being about $60,000 a year. And that, it's not a huge salary, but at least it's enough that a young person could have a chance to get a start, and maybe, you know, and especially if they're married to somebody else who has a job, they would have a chance. It's not huge, but it's a living wage. At least you would have a chance to start in your career. So when you do the math, then in order to have 2 people on duty all the time, you need 6 people at about $60,000 a year. That's $360,000. But you also have to pay their Social Security. You have to put equipment on them. They need air tanks, and they need the things to cover them, to protect them from the fire. They need the basic gear. So by the time you do all that, it's more like $450,000 a year to have a bare bones minimum wage, hire enough firefighters to have a couple on duty. So we took that and we kind of worked backwards from there to figure out, well, how much of a tax do we need? Because we don't want to ask for more than is really needed. And so when we did the math, a 1 penny per dollar increase, a 1% increase, would take in about $5.7 million a year, or about, if you were to divide it evenly among the 10 agencies, that'd be $570,000. No, we're not going to divide it evenly, and the reason is that districts are different. Some districts have bigger responsibilities. Calaveras Consolidated has 1/3 of the population in a huge geographic area. Ebbets Pass is slightly larger than the average too. I think Ebbets Pass is like 15% of the population, and I think it's about 10%. Copperopolis is roughly 10% of the county. Altaville is one of the smallest districts, and we set the formula to give enough, and I'm going to get to a breakdown that shows every district how much it would get, and that's just a slide or 2 away, so I am going to get there. So we had to do 2 things with the formula. We wanted enough so the small districts could get a couple firefighters on duty, but we needed to allocate some of it based on the size of the districts so that the big districts would have enough money to open the stations and staff the places that they're not currently staffing. So we took in the formula, which I'm going to go into detail on this. You're going to get all this. Was meant to meet the basic staffing needs and to take into account population and call volume and the geographic area covered by each fire district. Because the geographic area, for example, covered by my fire district has a unique characteristic in San Andreas that nobody else has. We have a lot of extra calls because we have the jail, the convalescent hospital, the county government, the hospital. There's a lot of this public infrastructure that generates calls for us, but that doesn't pay taxes. So here is a breakdown of the formula and what each one would get. And Altaville-Malones in the 2020-2021 fiscal year, if this had been in effect, would have received $443,262.15. And this is also on our website, so I've got things that have our website on it in the back, and you can take that and you can look at it any time, basically, that way. And then Copperopolis is a larger district, so Copper would have gotten $562,601.96. And we went around and around on what to do for the formula, because the different interests of the small districts and the large districts, and the need for the large districts to know that the small districts were going to be there when they needed them, and for the small districts to have the same feeling about the large districts. For example, Ebbets Pass is actually the best finance district in the county, but they have the better staffing. They have 3 on the engine up in Arnold, but only 2 down at Hathaway Pines. Well, the Hathaway Pines engine is the most likely one that's going to come to Angels Camp or to Copper if there's a big fire. So we would love to have the staffing up to standard on that engine. So the formula works this way. 69% of it is divided evenly among the 10 agencies. 69%. So every agency starts off with 6.9% of it. 1% goes to San Andreas to compensate for the burden of protecting county-wide infrastructure like the jail, the courthouse, the hospital, and the government center. And then the remaining 30% is allocated proportionately by district population. And I've got a pie chart over here that shows what percentage of population each district is. Calaveras Consolidated, which is in the Valley Springs area, is this biggest one. It's 32%. That's almost a third of the county. Copperopolis is 10% of the county's population. Ebbets Pass up in the Arnold area is 15%. Let's see, Angels Camp is 8%, and Altaville-Malones is one of the smallest in terms of population, is 3% of the population. They are intertwined with each other. It is. And basically we've been taking advantage of them, and they've been providing a wonderful service for not. I know. Yep. I know. I feel the same way. I feel like these young people have been working their hearts out for us, and we haven't really. Yep. I know. I would like to see more of these people stay here, because they're exactly the kind of people that you would want to have starting families and putting down roots in the community. I would like to see them be able to work for a living and make it here. But so I wanted to talk about what sales tax is like elsewhere in California, because of course if you're going to propose a tax, one of the things we've been able to say is that we had the lowest sales tax. We only had 7.25%. 8.75 in Sacramento County, 8.5% in San Francisco, 9.25 in Oakland, most of Alameda County, Santa Cruz, and Monterey, 9.5 to 10.5 in LA County. Most of LA County is 10.25. So, you know, if you go to Monterey or you go to LA County, you're going to be paying that sales tax if you go out to dinner or buy something. Here in the region, the current sales taxes are 9% in Stockton, 8.25 in Lodi, 8.75 in Sacramento. It's currently 7.25 in most of Calaveras County, but it's 7.75 in Angels Camp. And then in neighboring counties, we've got 7.75 in Sonora and 7.75 in Jackson. And then down here in Oakdale is 8.375. The basic Calaveras County is 7.25, so we're one of the lowest in California. That's as low as it gets basically in California, is 7.25. Well, when you buy stuff, look at the receipt. You'll see. You'll see. Now, when you buy stuff in Angels Camp, it's 7.75%. Now, this is the total sales tax. This isn't the part that comes here. The county does get, and so does Angels Camp, 1%, 1 percentage point of the sales tax gathered in each of those locations. But the fire districts do not get any of that.
Do you know if there's any other things on the ballot to raise taxes?
In Calaveras County, I'm not aware of any others in Calaveras County.
How about other areas that would impact our taxes?
I have not looked at the November ballot yet. Is there anything else on the November ballot?
No.
Yeah. I'm not aware of anything else on the November ballot. Or was it Tuolumne County? It's Tuolumne County. Oh.
I think, what is it, 40 goes to the police, 30 goes to fire, and then the other 30% goes to roads.
Yeah.
What are we already paying for road taxes for? I can't see the public supporting that. For the pothole. Right, right. And that's all goes.
So I'm going to sum up the PowerPoint, but then I'm going to go to the actual text of the measure, because there's a bunch of sections of the measure that I wanted to get into some of the details, because I think there's people here that care about the details and would like to know what checks and balances are in there.
Before you do, can I ask, how many of the fire districts already have an assessment in place?
I know
Like Copper does and
Copper does, Ebbets does, I know West Point does. Moke Hills is really old. They did do one like 25 years ago. San Andreas did one last year. Calco has failed to do it. They consolidated, and they still have different tax rates in the different parts. Because you remember that used to be Foothill Fire and Jenny Lind Fire, and they consolidated to be one district, because why pay for two fire chiefs if you can just pay for one? You know, there is some efficiency in being one district instead of two. Right. So Calaveras consolidated did form one district, but they still have different tax rates in the different part of the district. They didn't resolve that, and that has been a hang-up. So they've tried to pass measures that were property taxes, but property taxes tend to generate a lot of opposition, because you have a lot of people who either they're retirees on fixed incomes who own their homes. There's various people who feel that a property tax is not going to be good for them, even though they want the fire service. It's not like anybody's opposed to firefighters, but some people just don't want the extra outgo for a property tax. So I was talking to one friend in San Andreas who's very opposed to property taxes, and he said he likes sales taxes better because everybody pays it, not just the property owners. And including everybody includes visitors to the county who use our services and who get help when they need help.
so you're saying this bill will only take from sales tax and purchases?
That's correct. Now, sales tax, you know, it's only some things. So it's not groceries, it's not medications, you know, not your rent, not a mortgage. It's things like going out to dinner, buying clothes, renting skis when you go to the resort, stuff like that. Does get alcohol, obviously there's sales tax, gasoline pays sales tax. I thought there was sales tax on gasoline. There's a lot of taxes on gasoline. Gasoline has multiple taxes. There's a gas tax and a regular, I believe. Yeah, if you look at the gasoline. So now I'm going into the actual ordinance, and I highlighted several sections that I particularly wanted to share. But I invite you, it's posted on our website, and I think some of you have already read it, but I'm hoping that that you'll take a look at it, because I think it's good to get into the details. So section 3.5703, the purpose. This ordinance is adopted to achieve the following and directs that the provisions hereof be interpreted in order to achieve those purposes. A, to adopt a retail transactions and use tax ordinance within the county in the amount of 1 cent per dollar, a rate of 1%, as provided herein for the specific purpose of generating funds to be deposited into the Calaveras local fire protection account that may only be used for the purposes specified herein, including adequate firefighter staffing, training, equipment, and facilities. So this is what in California law makes this a special tax. There's two kinds of taxes. There's special taxes and general taxes. And this is super important because, for example, the transient occupancy tax, the hotel tax that we voted on a few years ago, that's a general tax. Now, when it was proposed by the county expressed, the county leaders who put it on the ballot said that they intended to put a certain proportion to fire protection, a certain portion to law enforcement. But they did, they said that, but because it's a general tax, every year they get to decide what they really want to do. And if they have some other thing that seems more important to them, they're going to do that. So us fire districts, we've been getting some of it, but we have to go back every year and ask again because there's no guarantee that that's going to continue to be used for fire services. It could be used for other things. And in fact, when you look at general taxes, that's the law. You can't change that. Once it's voted in as a general tax, it's a general tax forever, and it can always be reallocated. A special tax, in contrast, can only be used for the purpose for which it was voted into place. And that's extremely important, and this is a special tax, and that's why I read that paragraph, because it says it can only be used for these purposes.
And doesn't the difference between the words general and special, so general goes into our general fund. Our lovely board of supervisors in Calaveras County decide who gets what and how much. And if they want to take from one and give to somebody else, they have that. This is a special tax, so we have our own account. The board of supervisors can't touch it. And it goes specifically to the special thing it was created for and nobody else.
Can these numbers ever be changed, the percentages that are allocated, or does it?
By a vote of the voters could change it.
I don't see anywhere in here it says that once you pass this, right now the fire district gets X amount from the county, correct?
We get whatever they're willing to allocate to us, but it's
This is just like the California lottery, actually, is what you're proposing. Because as soon as the lottery started paying the school districts, the state took the money away from the schools.
well, so
Now the county doesn't have to pay.
but let me tell you, the amount that the county gives us is so small that even if they take it away, we're going to be better off. So am I going to fight over 40,000 when I have a chance to have 400,000? So I'm talking about one fire district.
Understand that, that's all.
So if my fire district, okay, so I forget what the exact number is, 500,000, 400,000, whatever. The exact amount for my district would be 10 times or 15 times more than the small amount that they give us now that they could take away anyway.
So they could take your budget away on the backside.
No, but only part of,
The sales tax is actually going to be paying for it all. They can spend that money
no,
somewhere.
let me give you a more, no, because here's how complicated it is. So Calaveras, and so my fire district, San Andreas, when I started had about 250,000 a year in reliable revenue. Now we have about 500,000 a year in reliable revenue. And by reliable revenue, I mean property tax that the county can't touch. So we're operating on about 500,000 a year, and we're able to keep the lights on and keep a volunteer force trained and keep operating. Some years, the county gives us another $40,000, $30,000. That's the only thing that we could lose, but we don't really have a guarantee of having it anyway. So even if this tax, see what I'm saying? So yes, we could get this tax passed and the county could say, oh, we're going to take that away. But the county amount is much smaller than what we're talking about. And so there's basically 4 or 5 significant pots of money that can affect fire districts. We all have our basic property tax revenue. That's our share of the property tax. The county can't take that away. We all, or at least those of us that have passed special assessments, also have special assessments. The county can't take that away. What the county can take away is there's two categories of money. One is Prop 172, and I forget what that was from, but it's a statewide thing, 172. They give us some of that, and they give us some of the Transient Occupancy Tax, which is the hotel tax locally. But the amount we get for each district is maybe 30, 40, 50,000 a year. It's very small. It's not even one firefighter's worth of money. So it's significant because it can help us like replace our air tanks or maybe do a repair on one of our engines, but it's not the bulk of it. And so yes, there is a tiny bit that the county could take away in a sense, but when I say take away, I have to admit that I'm never assumed that it was a very secure amount of money anyway, because it was general fund money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because general fund can be moved anywhere they want.
Right, but most of the revenue that we rely on to run the fire districts is not from the general fund. And I think Steve would agree that most of his is either the assessments or the property tax. Yep. Well, but they also put the TOT and the Prop 172 into the general fund. It's okay. So if you look at the people that get hired to analyze visitor spending in Calaveras County, they say it's around 200,000 a year. I adjusted that figure slightly because visitors do spend money in groceries, and sometimes they buy food that's not taxed. So my estimate is that about 195 million a year is spending by visitors, based on that consultant report that was done for the California Tourism Agency. So that's about a third of the total spending, roughly. It could change. There's no guarantee that property tax goes up and down depending on things, how the economy is. In recent years, property tax has been going up pretty vigorously in Calaveras County. For whatever reason, the pandemic has been a growth time for certain kinds of spending in Calaveras, especially on the Highway 4 corridor. Yes, sir. I mean, your property value? No, I'm talking about sales tax, taxable sales. No, because taxable sales is so influenced by people coming from out of the area. You know, if that goes up and down depending on the times, and, you know, who knows, you know. But in recent years, it's been a substantial proportion, about a third of it.
I feel like a lot more people are coming up to this area. There's just so much traffic now, and so many
Yep.
people are learning about all of our fun, good stuff up here, and they're coming up here, and there's just so much more litter and
Trying to get out of the valley.
Yeah, yep, 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 yep. Yeah, it's very crowded if you go up to Lake Alpine on a Saturday. It's very crowded.
It used to be nobody up there.
I know.
Now you go up there and it's like, can I ask a really different question?
Sure.
You guys are talking a lot about training.
Yes.
Has it been considered that maybe this is a training facility in addition to a firehouse? That
Yes.
knows it's going to be doing training for people to go out, and maybe the state can help pay for that?
Good luck getting the state to help pay. But I want to tell you, one of the things that's impressed me about the fire agencies in Calaveras County, and Steve can talk to this, is how well they cooperate to train new firefighters. Matter of fact, I don't know how long ago, but you did the live burn. Copperopolis hosted what's called the live burn a month and a half ago, which is where they actually either create a temporary structure or get an old house and burn it down so that the trainees can see what it's like to be inside a burning structure. Copperopolis hosted that. Other years it's been hosted by San Andreas or by Angels Camp. We all take turns. And so there's this fire academy that we cooperate basically to host every year that trains new firefighters. So we're not waiting for the state to fund us. We're going ahead and,
No, I get that.
yeah.
I keep hearing training, and I gotta wonder if there's a way to benefit from that. But I'll tell you that whole fire
We-
thing that you just talked about, that was on Cheyenne Road the other day.
Oh dear. Yeah.
My husband was gonna call.
Thank you.
But it's like, they send these kids to the training, to the academy. A lot of the districts foot the bill. Copper, I know, foots the bill. The sad thing is, if they want to get any additional training, like my husband's going through the EMT class right now, he has to pay for it. You know, $450 for the class, the book was $500, you know, he has to do that on Wednesday nights, Zoom, and all day Sundays. So these, and you know, it's fine, we can afford it, but these young kids that come from Stockton,
Right.
come from Modesto up here, and then they have to go to these classes which are in Murphy's or in Arnold or wherever. So they have that, and you know, they're 18, 19 years old, they make $150 in 24 hours, and then they've got to pay all this, and it's like, California isn't going to pay. They're going to put all their money into CAL FIRE. You know, they got $3.7 billion.
This is I want to tell you, this is a huge conversation. Actually, the guy who's the training officer now for this group is Jimmy Stewart, who's one of our captains in San Andreas. And he's persuaded, I guess, them to increase the fee that's charged per firefighter to do this, because in many cases, the districts will pay the cost to get the firefighter trained. I don't know how it works in every district, but yeah.
Only if they pass.
Right. Well, there's a big incentive to pass. So, but we do pay the cost because these young people, if it looks like they're going to work for us for a while, we pay the cost to get them in the door, right? And that seems like it's been a good deal for us for a long time. We may rethink the timing because we don't seem to hold on to them as long as we used to. But for the moment, a lot of these agencies are paying the cost. And this is one of the things that the 1 cent sales tax could pay for, is the cost of training, which is, and training is not just the initial training, because you have to do a certain number of hours every year and keep your skills sharp. This is not something where you want to be like, okay, now I'm assessing you. Let me see. Airway, breathing, you know, what am I looking at? You know, you want to be sharp when you're assessing a person in an emergency. So I'm going to read another paragraph here that I think is important. To adopt a retail transactions and use tax ordinance that can be administered in a manner that will be, to the greatest degree possible, consistent with the provisions of Part 1.6 of Division 2 of the Revenue and Taxation Code, minimize the cost of collecting the transactions and use taxes, and at the same time minimize the burden of record keeping upon persons subject to taxation under the provisions of this ordinance. That was super boring. Did you get your nap in? So that's what I'm going to do. I am so sorry to put you through this, but well, here's what I got asked. One of my neighbors who didn't like property taxes but thought a sales tax would be a good way said, why don't we do a sales tax in San Andreas Fire? It's not practical to do a sales tax in a local fire district because there's no way already in place to know who the businesses are within the district, because the fire district doesn't issue business licenses. The only entities that really issue business licenses that create a boundary where you can do a sales tax is either within a county government or within a city. The cities and the counties issue business licenses. And so as a practical matter, you want to do this in the simplest way possible through the methods that are, and so doing it county-wide makes sense because they already collect sales tax. We're not going to invent anything new. In plain language, it's do it the way you already do it. Don't add anything. Don't make it more complicated. So that's one of the reasons that provision is in there, is to have it done the same way that existing sales tax is gathered. And there's a whole lot of language in this thing. I'm not going to bore you with all of it, but I would say that a good 50% of this thing is just language to comply with the existing state system for doing a sales tax. Yes, ma'am.
Dana, also too, you guys, these stats were done during the COVID. So think about us not having COVID, all the people coming back up here, how much greater we are going to have a collection of funds. The funds will be distributed stronger and better because we don't have the COVID issue. These were done during the COVID times, okay? These stats are done during COVID. So just think of the visitation that's already improved up here, the Ironstone has gotten bigger, we're doing things here again, the picnic in the park is happening again, and so this will increase immensely, not just with the stats you see here, they will be a lot bigger.
All right. I'm sorry, this one might be a snoozer too, but I think it's important because it's the limits on how the fire districts and the fire department can use the money. This sets that out. So please bear with me. Funds shall be allocated annually to the local fire agencies in Calaveras County. The governing boards of those agencies are responsible to use those funds to improve the speed of response and the quality and quantity of personnel available to immediately respond to emergencies. The governing boards may also use those funds to improve or replace necessary equipment and facilities. No more than 30% of these funds may be used to improve or replace equipment and facilities, and no less than 70% of these funds may be used for staffing, including incentives, training, and stipends for volunteer firefighters, compensation, incentives, and training for paid firefighters, personal protective equipment for firefighters, and office and professional costs, including compensating an office manager, payroll services, auditing services, and the costs of required audits or reports related to the Calaveras local fire protection tax. No more than 5% of the total Calaveras local fire protection tax funds for each agency may be devoted to such office and professional costs. Yeah, so it's pretty strict about how it can be used, but we wanted them to be able to do the necessary stuff. And we went around and around on this because there were some of us in the citizen committee that wanted it to be only staffing. But we relented because the fire district said, well, we have to be able to, pay the payroll. We have to be able to do the audits. And if there's no station for them, because there are places where they would like to have a station and they have property, but there's literally no station. Like in Burson, they need to have a station there, and they could put a portable building there and have firefighters on site, but they have to have a way to do that.
So this is like for the stations for the equipment and just, is it gonna cover, it'll cover like, new equipment?
So the term new is something to be careful about because mostly we buy used fire engines because new ones are so hugely expensive.
What about stuff inside the firehouse, like, stoves, stuff like that they need in there?
If they need, yeah, they need to have a place to eat. You could buy that. It's a
Because I know the Altoville Fire Station for the last 5 years, you walk in there, you can barely breathe because their stove leaks propane.
oh, that's terrible.
And there's sometimes I walk in there and I'm like, what, you guys, did she smell that? No, we don't smell it, we're used to it. I'm like, well, these mornings, they're not gonna wake up. Fire station, there's something wrong with that picture. Yeah, no.
Yeah. Well, but I have to point out that I've looked at the budgets for all these districts, and Altaville happens to be the one that has the smallest amount of reliable revenue. Basically, it barely exists, and it's only managed to survive because, well, there's that $50,000 a year from Angels helps a little, but it's mostly the strike team earnings is what's kept it alive. I think so.
Get a local gas company to come out and fix the line. Call somebody or post it on public, say, hey, come help the firefighters.
So
That's a lot of PR they're gonna get if they do it. Yeah. Well, probably just like, somebody who does plumbing and stuff.
So forgive me, I'm gonna keep plowing on so you're not here all night because we haven't gotten. So this next one I was going to read is that formula that I told you about, right? So in the event that consolidations or other actions change the number of local fire agencies, the same funds will continue to be distributed to the successor agencies serving the geographic areas represented by the fire agencies in existence in 2021. What that means is, let's say that suddenly Copperopolis decided to consolidate with Altaville Malonas. Not going to happen, but if you did it, then you would get the same revenue. Basically, you would continue. you would continue. I love Altaville because Altaville is one of the ones that comes and helps us when we have those nasty car crashes. They come to the car crashes on 49 with us, all the time. So thank you. So it just means that you continue to get the same money for the same geographic areas. You wouldn't lose anything if there was consolidations.
And if somebody opened a new one, how would that change where the money goes?
You mean like they divided up, did a new fire district? Where would they do that?
Yeah, or one of them that already voted to close decided to open back up.
Well, they would still get the same money for the same geographic area. So because they can't just open up without passing LAFCO, so the same county is going to be just divided up differently among the districts, but they would still get the same revenue.
So if they use their revenue to build a fire station in one of the 10 districts that the money is being allocated to, that's what they utilize their money for, to build a fire station, but they're not gonna get any more.
Right.
So
Right.
they're just gonna use
But
the.
they can only use 30% of it.
For facilities and things, right.
So,
So what if they build a new fire station and combine Altaville and Angels together?
Then if they combine those two, then they would get both the revenue that now goes to Altaville and the revenue that now goes to Angels. And that's because it'd be in one pot, because it makes sense. They're running that whole area.
They're covering that distance and that many people. It should be like that anyways. Yeah.
So it is more difficult when you have, this is why this is a citizens initiative, is it's very difficult to get things done if you have to go through an elected body like the Board of Supervisors or the Angels Camp City Council. We found that very frustrating that we couldn't get, and I think it's human nature. I don't blame, because there's all good people. They get on these boards and there's no consensus on how to solve the problems.
The board members on San Andreas, they fight for their people.
Yeah,
I feel like Angels Camp needs to do more for our people.
yeah.
That's just my opinion. But you see, they look at it as you're not their people. That's true.
Yeah,
They always have that attitude towards everybody else in the county.
that divisiveness is unfortunate, and it's and part of the reason that I think we are able to do this is that the firefighters, we have a history of relying on each other. When somebody from San Andreas shows up at a scene and we see somebody from Altaville there, it's like, oh, thank goodness you're there, right? We work together, and I think that over time, and it's not always been like that, but for whatever reason in the last decades, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like the relationships have improved between the fire agencies.
Because they go out on the fires more and sleep together, so
Yeah.
they really are like a brotherhood. I mean, these guys,
Or have they always been on good terms? I don't know.
but I think they go out on these strike teams as a group, and like Calaveras County will send out a strike team of 8 to 10 trucks. And
Yep.
they go out and they spend 2 weeks living with each other, sleeping with each other, eating with each other.
So either you fall in love or you really hate each other after that. It's like,
And I think it's more fall in love with each other, really.
yeah.
I'm like, you guys are crazy.
So forgive me, I want to go through something that's a little boring but really important, which is some of the accountability issues, things that we did, the fiscal oversight and budget accountability. I'm very frustrated that nobody hardly ever comes to San Andreas Fire District board meetings, and we post it on the website and we post it out on the building, and we would like people to pay attention to what we're doing because, basically they're happy when we show up and there's a fire, but you probably have this too, Steve, that not many people come to. Yeah.
A lot of times you'll hear the things out of things people say about us that really aren't true. One other thing I want to add is that all the districts, they really try and utilize the grant program. Because there are grants out there that you can get to the feds, not so much the state, the feds, we just had a SCBA tank.
Yep.
Over time, they have to get triggered out.
15 years, it ages out and you can't use it anymore.
I wish people would come. Some of the people on the board are very bright people that have worked in public service and care about the community. And their insight and knowledge on, trying to help utilize their budget the best way we can. I really wish more people would come and actually look and see and
Right.
and those boards, you go home and you really see some of the effort.
So anyway, we wanted to make sure that the public would know how this money gets used and would have ways to. So first of all, you can always elect new board members, and all fire districts have to be audited every year. So there's audited budgets to look at. But in addition, I want to read this to you. Each fire district, or in the case of Angels Camp Fire Department, the city of Angels Camp, shall by June 1st each year produce a response improvement plan and budget detailing how it will use the revenue from the Calaveras Local Fire Protection Tax in the coming fiscal year beginning July 1st. Following voter approval of this measure, the fire districts in the city of Angels Camp will have 30 days to submit plans for the remainder of the 2022-23 fiscal year. These plans will be submitted to the Calaveras County Fire Services Joint Powers Authority. Also, each fire agency will each year provide the JPA with a copy of its annual audit and management report. The JPA will use the plans and audits each year to prepare a summary of the countywide improvements funded by the Calaveras Local Fire Protection Tax. The JPA will issue this summary in a news release to media outlets, provide copies to the Calaveras County Grand Jury and Board of Supervisors, and also post it online.
Is that just Angels Camp or everybody?
Everybody. All of them. And a countywide summary, because basically we're trying to make it that you can't avoid this, that if you're out in public you're going to trip over it and have to notice that, oh yeah, they're spending this money, because we want people to pay attention to it and we want people to complain if it's not done right. I'm only one board member and I'm going to get old and die, and there'll be other boards, and in the future I want other people just to pay attention, because the best way that we can get the best out of each other is by paying attention to what's going on. Anyway, yes ma'am.
Is this current law?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there currently a Calaveras County Fire Services Joint Powers Authority?
Yes. Yes. That was already formed several years ago. It is a strange government entity because it's really an entity created to buy things together. Like if we want to contract for mechanic services, we do a contract, or if we want to ask the Board of Supervisors to do something, but it has no budget, no money, and no paid employees. So essentially, it's a lobbying and contracting and negotiation entity that we created so the fire districts could work together. I'm on that board too, so. And you had a question, sir.
Is this current law, they have to actually do this right now, or
No,
new?
this would be new. This is to make sure that there's things written down in addition to the local county the local fire district budgets. So every fire district's going to have to do this.
So they have no accountability for what they're spending on anything?
No, they do already. So every fire district already has to do a budget every year, publicly adopt it, and have it audited. So this is basically piggybacking on that, requiring that this new money, so I want you to be able to go and say, well, where did that 1% sales tax go? Because if you just dump it in the pot with all the other money, who knows? But I want you to be able to go and say, did you properly use at least 70% of this for staffing? And this is creating a paper trail so that you can find that question out. It's an accountability factor.
Consequences listed in here if they don't do it?
I think the main consequence is that the voters will vote somebody else into the fire district boards. I mean, that's what my hope is, because that's really the consequence that gets people's attention. Yeah, natural consequences are best.
So in other words, they have to spend the money that they're allocated.
Actually, there's another section that I think I'm going to read, which is if they don't spend it, if they can't use it, it has to go back into the pot and be allocated appropriately the following year according to the rules. In other words, they can't. They can. There's no more than like. No, matter of fact, let me see, because there's. This next paragraph says, Plans may include a provision to retain up to 10% of funds received as a cash carryover. Such cash carryovers are to be retained by the agencies as a way to maintain service levels in future years when revenue declines. Such carryover funds may only be used for the purposes specified in this measure. And then I want to read you this next paragraph too, as well.
What happens if somebody says, I want to carry over my 30% for facilities to next year, and then I'll have...
They can't. They can't do it. You know. No. You don't want people to be able to bury big...
What happens if they ask that? You've already covered it.
Yeah, no. So part of the control on this is that I don't know how well you're aware, but the county government acts as the banker for the local special districts. So we have our money, and it's in basically a bank account, and the county auditor provides that service. So when this is made, this is the rules for the banker, if you will, and the banker knows that if it doesn't get used, it has to go back in the account and then get allocated as the rules dictate the following year. But I wanted to read another one. It says, if any agency or agencies choose either temporarily or permanently to not receive Calaveras local fire protection tax funding, then the allocation formula shall be changed to show that the first 69% is evenly divided among the remaining agencies, and that 1% shall be allocated to San Andreas Fire, and the remaining 30% by population. In other words, it's the same formula, but that it would take out the agency that chooses not to do it. And the reason we put that in there is, what if somebody just decides philosophically that they can't use it or won't use it? Okay, now I'm going to read another paragraph to you.
Wait a minute, what does it mean about just give it to San Andreas Fire Protection?
The 1% is because we have the jail and the hospital and the government center and the DMV. Yeah, the county seat, because that generates a lot of calls for us. It basically, you know, we only have like 2,000 people who live in San Andreas, but during the daytime hours, we have like 4 or 5 times that many people there because of all the workers and the people that have to come for various things. And that don't pay taxes, and that's the problem, is it's all government stuff. Any portion of an agency's Calaveras local fire protection tax funding that is not either spent on a budgeted purpose or retained as a cash carryover shall be returned to the Calaveras local fire protection account and included in funds available for allocation and distribution in the following fiscal year. In years with revenue growth such that receipts exceed 110% of the estimated amounts on which the fire agencies base their budgets, then the amount in excess of 110% shall be retained in the Calaveras local fire protection account and made available for allocation and distribution in the next fiscal year. So if you get a big windfall, we don't want a big windfall to suddenly just get gulped down and hidden somewhere. This means that it gets allocated according to the rules. And revenue that's between 100% and 110% of the estimated revenue used as the basis for each budget in the fire protection years may at the discretion of those agencies either be retained as a cash carryover or returned. In either case, all funds shall be used only as specified in approved Calaveras local fire protection tax budgets. Now, the way this works in practice is that when the bank distributes these funds to each fire district, the fire districts have to keep this in a separate account and only move it when they designate what it's being used for. And I know this because my fire district has a special assessment. We put that special assessment in a particular account, and we only move it when we say, okay, we're going to pay this amount of wages for this many firefighters or this many stipends, because otherwise you don't have a paper trail to show how it's used, right? And then somebody will say, well, what happened to the sales tax? Where did it go? And if it was just dumped into the regular main account, you wouldn't be able to tell.
Hey, Dana.
Yes, ma'am.
In talking to your districts, do you have any that are kind of like not real ambitious about doing their books correctly?
If they're not, they're going to be in trouble with their accountant and with the grand jury, because this is why we're giving it to the grand jury, is grand juries can really bring a lot of pressure to get a agency to clean up. And I want to tell you that's partly why we allowed up to 5% for office expenses, is we want them to hire accountants and do it right. And a lot of these districts have been Yes, not as rigorous as others. Some districts, basically, I don't know if your experience has been this, Steve, but the districts vary quite a bit in their accounting practices.
Yeah, but on an audit, anybody can go and ask for a public document.
It's a public document.
Accountant will point out what he thinks is a deficiency or something that you have done wrong, and you have to correct it.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's actually interesting reading, that one of the boards. But it's every year,
Every year. I've got like 5 years of them sitting in a filing cabinet at my house for San Andreas. Okay. Let me see what else, if there's anything else, and then we'll... Oh, this one very important thing right at the end. Okay. Do you guys know what a Gan limit is? Do you know what a Gan limit is? The Gan limit is this rule that you can't spend more than a certain amount of money in a public agency. Basically based on, it was set back by, it's not maybe Prop 13, but one of the ones that came after Prop 13. So in order to spend the sales tax, you have to temporarily raise the Gan limit, and you cannot permanently raise it. You can only raise it for 4 years. And here in Copperopolis, you have to do this. You have to have a vote every so many years.
It's confusing to the people, because we just did it, last year, Measure D? And people are like, why are we doing this again?
Yeah, I remember that.
Because you couldn't get your money down.
Right.
that's why they set the limit.
Things have changed since the 70s.
And we adjusted that limit up as we gain more money. So basically, you have to go back and say, okay, we've gone over gain limit on spending, is that okay?
Right. So
We're not looking for more money, it's money we've already spent to run the organization.
so this,
Who has to approve that spending?
the voters.
Okay.
So I want to read this to you, and then we can explain it more. Appropriations limit increase pursuant to California Constitution. Pursuant to California Constitution Article 13B and applicable laws, for 4 years from September 1st, 2022, the appropriations limit for each Calaveras County Fire District and for the City of Angels Camp shall be increased by the amount of the funding that each receives each year from the Calaveras Local Fire Protection Tax. So long as the Calaveras Local Fire Protection Tax shall remain in effect, Calaveras County every 4 years shall hold a timely countywide election asking voters if they wish to reauthorize the appropriation limit increases that make it possible for the fire districts in the City of Angels Camp to spend revenue from the tax. These elections may be consolidated with other elections to reduce costs. So
it's not a permanent thing.
it's every 4 years we have to decide, do we still want to let the fire districts spend this money? This is a powerful incentive for the districts to get their act together and to do it right, to keep firefighters on duty, to keep the service quality high. Because if they don't, it could always go away.
Well, you're essentially doubling their budgets right now by doing this.
Some of them it would double, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're doubling their budgets.
Yeah, the smaller districts, yes. Yes.
What percentage is copper increasing with this?
Well, we're looking at 1.2, 1.3 is our budget now, so we thought maybe 600,000 would come to us if this initiative passed, so, maybe 50% increase.
Well, that's like a blank check to just go right and
No,
buy new trucks.
it's split 70-30.
Well,
Well, just to be specific, we do have a new truck coming in at the end of this month, a red engine in copper. But a lot of the money that they get for these fire trucks, Steve, a lot of the money that we get for the fire truck, the new one coming in, is that from the Butte fire, a lot of the money that's,
Some of that was.
yeah,
Well,
we get big chunks
so-
from the fire, from the state or the feds, and so that helps purchase the big things.
Right.
But, you know,
But
the other things that they need, like the Lucas machine, which is an automatic automatic CPR machine, what was that, 25,000? So those are the things that, these
So
fire departments use, that's expensive.
part of the reason this is structured the way it is it is sometimes possible to get grants for big equipment. So 5 years ago in 2017, my agency bought a new fire engine, what we call a Type 2, which is often used for structure fires. That was a $750,000 purchase. We would never be able to do that with our existing budget. Most of our vehicles are used vehicles, but with a federal grant covering most of it, we could. And part of the reason that this measure limits how much can be used on equipment is we want to make sure that there's staff, because you're right, an agency that had enough money could go crazy and have all kinds of fire engines, but if they don't have firefighters to operate them, Yes, ma'am.
What is your budget for San Andreas for a year?
It's now about $500,000 a year.
And if this passes, maybe it'll be $1 million?
And if this passes, no, it would be about 900,000. It'd be like 950,000, something like that.
San Andreas gets about if this passes, it'll be 900,000. And he was just saying Coppers would be $2 million a year.
Around 2 million? No, 1 point.
Well, it would be our total budget if it passed. Right now, our budget is about 1.2 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
If that passed, we figure we might get 60,000. We're not sure, but that's what we're figuring.
So 1.8.
Yeah, it would be, 1.8.
So is that the highest in the district?
No, the biggest budget is Ebbets Pass.
That is passed?
Ebbets, I think they're like 1.6 or are they 2.4? I mean, they're quite a bit more because they have very high property values and they've also passed some special assessments.
And how much is English County?
I don't know what the city's budget is for their fire department, but I would have to,
About the same as yours?
I would have to guess it's more because they've got paid firefighters on duty all the time and they're in PERS. So they basically, somebody from CAL FIRE told me that a station with one engine staffed is about 1.2 million. Is kind of the bare bones minimum for most places. Little local fire agencies do better than that. I mean, they do it for less money because of the volunteers. Now, I want to tell you, in San Andreas, I would like to have 2 paid firefighters on duty all the time. But I want to keep the volunteer program because really I want to have 4 firefighters on the engine. I want to have a couple of them to be older people that have 5 or 10 years experience in the driver's seat and
Well, what you call volunteers, they've been there 5
some of them
years.
have been there many years, yes.
They're really not volunteers anymore.
Well, and if we're not paying them, they are.
They're not paying, yeah, but after 5 years, I think you're not a volunteer anymore.
Well, I understand what you're saying.
Paid staff member. Yeah, you're not paid staff member.
So anyway, I wanted to open up. I thought, ma'am, you had some questions, and I was wanting to give you a chance to ask me them.
Okay. Actually, you've done a fairly decent job, and my questions and issues are, a lot of them have already been addressed. Personally, I've lived in Copper 20 years. Okay. I take exception to the way you describe this sales tax as it's only a 1 cent increase, because that doesn't ring as true as saying it's a 1% that's added onto your existing sales tax. And so, it may sound like it's some just tiny minuscule amount of money, but when you start factoring it in, on top of the fact that we're in massive inflation right now, and everything under the sun is costing a lot of money, that 1% on top of what we're paying could be a real problem for an awful lot of people. And Calaveras County has an awful lot of people who are income compromised.
Yep.
So, we tend to be very aware of how this is going to affect the pocketbook. It's a great idea. Believe me, I have nothing but the utmost respect, admiration, and appreciation for all the firefighters. I love you guys. We'd be lost without you. But at the same time, this could be a real budget breaker for a lot of people. I mean, we're already having people move out of the area as it is because they can't afford to stay here. And to push it up by a full 1%, that's a whole lot of money. I mean, I'm not a spring chicken. I've been around for a while, and I've seen property sales tax increases happen across the board in various communities where I've lived, but I've never seen one go up by 1% at a time. That's a big, big jump, even if it's a special assessment, even if it's specifically designated to rescue the fire departments. It's a huge expense. It really is. Now, I don't feel as bad about the way the funds are being allocated now that you've explained it and cleared it up a little bit more. But where's my papers? I came prepared. Oh, and you answered the question about what happens if any one particular district gets, ends up with a little bit of money left over, what happens to that? And you've explained clearly that we can keep the Board of Supervisors, greedy little nits, out of the money, because that has been a real concern for me, knowing their past behavior of reallocating funds and things not getting done when they were supposed to. Here in Copper, we had a measure on the ballot many years back, and I know Steve will remember, for a school, because a population was growing and they were saying, oh, we're going to have to put them in the school here, we can't keep sending the kids up to Angels, there's just not room for them. And then the housing market crashed. And that money just sort of, nobody talked about it anymore. And I started asking, where's the money?
We're supposed to have gotten the lottery.
No, this was totally different. Totally different. We were going to pay,
They were gonna build a high school.
it was a measure that was passed strictly to raise money to build the school here. And then, of course, well, we can't put it on the property that they thought they were gonna hit first because there's rattlesnakes. Well, duh, this is Copper. And then it was, you can't put it here because there's asbestos. We have asbestos mine on the other side of the lake, for Pete's sake. We don't have asbestos, it's everywhere. So, I mean, there were a lot of reasons why the school didn't get built. But somehow, there's never been a clear accounting, in my estimation, as to where that money went. So I don't trust the Board of Supervisors not to find some sneaky way. And I think you've done a good job of answering that question for me about the protections that are in place to keep the board out of the money. But I still, I just still have such an issue with that 1%. Had it been less than that, like it had been 0.5%, it might not have been so painful. Because right now, with everything costing more, it's a real hit.
I think that it's really great that you came, because I think a lot of other people will have the same feeling.
That's what I've heard repeatedly from people that I've talked to. They're all saying, I'm not voting for that, I'm not voting for a 1% sales tax. Because it is a lot of money.
Come to this meeting.
It should have been here.
I am
It should
so
have been here.
angry with the people in
Yeah,
Dublin right
people
now.
talk, but they don't act.
With how many of us are here?
The other question,
12,
Steve, you would know
13.
this. What are our chances of getting rid of our current $150 assessment if this goes into place? Because why should we be taxed twice for this?
I mean, I would bring that to the board and see. The
Because,
75
because that is gonna be an issue, that if we're gonna be paying the 1% sales tax,
The one assessment is 75, that's because of the tribal, that was for the fire. And then when we
well, it was
started,
originally 50 and then it went up. I would rather see that go up to 100.
but like the paramedic assessment is 75, that has never, ever even come close to paying for the paramedic program.
I'm
that we
sure,
put out
I'm
there.
sure.
We've always had to take money out of the general thing to boost that up.
Yeah,
because
I believe it.
just, because the paramedic program, when it started off as grants, John Owen, that was instrumental in that. And then after 1 year, we were burdened with the payment for it, and that's when we started at 75, but it's never ever, because of the supplies that we utilize going to advanced life situations.
Yeah, I do understand that, but if we're gonna be contributing $571,000 to the Copper budget, people are going to object to paying that property tax assessment that comes up every year. And a lot of people
I would
probably
love to
will
have
not
that
look at
tax,
it.
I would love to have that tax go away. I would hate to have it increased. Why, as we as homeowners are the big supporters to foot the bill. everybody that comes through and purchases anything in our county, and we get a lot of tourists
Have
up
you
here.
looked at the property tax base in Copper? And with all the new building that's going on, I mean, granted, I wish Copper Valley development would go away entirely, but, you know, that's probably something we're gonna be stuck with.
Right.
Well,
Till they bankrupt, which they probably will.
Another thing too is the county has been slow a few years as far as getting the money that belongs to us. You know, they've been very way behind, understaffing. I know like on the Angels and some of the trailer parks, they just hit those poor people, retired people. They made a mistake and didn't assess for 5 years what they should have. So they've gone back and sent out letters and given them
Oh, dear.
until November to pay 5 years of additional tax. And I was really surprised, Guy Evans, who works for me, he has property in Detroit, I saved one. He had to leave the,
I have three of them over there too.
county assessor. I was like, wow. And I'm sure that person in the state is still working in the county office there.
But Steve, they can file for appeal. I have 3 homes over there. They can file for an extension and appeal.
Yeah, he did,
For
he
12
is
months.
filing for the appeal.
Isn't that Eltonville area right there, or same where it is?
Yeah, it's Angel.
It has effects, I said, there's something to do with, trailer parks, state in the city or something like that. They have followed, look like the auditor, they are behind,
Yes.
we used to have, Joel Schwartz, who worked for us as, administrative officer like 50 months ago. And he actually, he was like a pain in the butt up there, he was up there all the time, and he started to get some of the money we were entitled to. It's like every new home, you're supposed to get
Exaction fees.
exactly.
We were getting jerked around, pardon me, on that too. Forgive me for digressing, but did you have a question on Buzz?
I spent a fortune on fire insurance. And, this isn't anything like what I'm spending on fire insurance. I know you can't predict what insurance companies are gonna do, but if you know you keep up with the fire departments, I can't imagine what the fire insurance is.
Yeah.
A lot of the people that are on limited incomes, you don't eat out a lot. You're not taxed on your groceries. So this tax, if you spend $100 a month, it's $1 that it's gonna be increased. It's, if you count that in 12 months, it's $12. I would rather pay,
But it's not that $1 that's the issue, it's the fact that it's the $1 on top of the $7 I'm already paying.
you wouldn't pay $1 on top of $7.
No, you would pay 1%.
Well, it is.
You are adding 1% to the sales tax.
Right.
Which means you are adding $1 more for every $100 you spend.
Yep.
So therefore, instead of paying a sales tax that is 7.25%,
I get what you're saying, yeah.
then you're paying 8.25. So there's
Yep.
$8.25. So, you know, this business is saying it's just a penny on the dollar. You know, it's a 1% increase in the sales tax. And that does become an issue.
And I understand your point where it is hard on a lot of people, but we're at the point where we as a community have to do something to help the people that help us. And these guys, they are hurting so bad.
I agree with Steve, because when he was first brought up at the board meeting, what we were talking about, I mean, I was set, and as I started looking at it and saw how, I think it's fairly important for what we're gonna get. I think the people that come into the county and require our services, you know, you gotta scan, and all you gotta do is, full station road, vehicle road, or whatever you say, once a week, you know, at the water trough there. And it's only gonna get worse with the street light. I mean, the straighter that road gets, the faster they're going to go. And then when it squeezes back down with that, water trough under that concrete bridge is, it's gonna be a mess, you know.
And what are we down to right now? Usually we have 15 interns a year. We have 4 now. CAL FIRE has taken everybody. I'm not against CAL FIRE, because CAL FIRE is great, but they pay these guys living wages. And
They're
our
taking our big
guys,
guys away.
but our guys, we can't diss them for doing what they need to do to support a family. So it's nothing against the guys and it's nothing against CAL FIREs, but we're down to 4 interns now. We have one volunteer who doesn't really come, but we don't have any guys to go out on, and we're not the only station.
It's
We
hitting
don't
us.
have any guys to go out on the strike.
Volunteers is nationwide, actually. I mean, just to be a volunteer. When I first started, it wasn't that bad. Now, I mean, just to be a volunteer, you have to have a minimum of $85 a year saved upon them.
You're preaching to the choir. I'm a retired nurse. I know what the
Yeah.
continuing ed stuff is
And
like.
kids nowadays, and I've got one that's 24, I mean, they're not the same. Their sense of community for the most part is not the same as it used to be. It's more or less for me, more
Yes. Yes, ma'am. We have a different question.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to know how you arrived at 1%.
It was walking it backwards from what it would cost to have 2 firefighters on duty in even the smallest districts, and then having enough so that when we divide it proportionally, that the bigger districts would get a little extra, because the bigger districts like Copper just have more people and more area to cover. So the smallest districts, we wanted them to be able to have at least 2 firefighters on duty, and the bigger districts, we wanted them to be able to add to their staffing wherever they needed it, because every district's a little different. So we looked at a half-cent, and it wasn't enough money to do it. And so, yeah, I agree. I mean, we were talking half-cent, 3/4 of a cent. You can do it in 1/8 cent increments. And it was until we got to 1% that we had enough. And it's unfortunate that there's so few options for operations. You can get grants for equipment sometimes, and they come with a lot of restrictions. And one of the ironies is when this passes, that 30% that they can spend on facilities and equipment, sometimes you just have to have a match. Sometimes in order to, the hoop you have to jump through to get a grant is that you need $5,000 so you can get $20,000 to buy SCBA units or a piece of equipment that you need to do whatever. Yes.
I'm just thinking, like I was just telling them, it's pretty sad that, somebody can work at McDonald's for $16 an hour.
Yep.
But then you go to the fire station, you can't even get that, and you're responsible for people's lives, and you
Yep.
don't have all that training.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with that.
You know what? People do it for the love, because it's a job that requires a special person. And I'm seeing a nod from the nurse. I'm married to a registered nurse. So even though you think nurses get paid well, but considering what they do, it's not that great. It's not that great because of the, well, and as we've seen in the pandemic, the unusual risks and the complexity of what they have to know and the decisions they have to make.
I want to be able to vote for this. I want to be a hard yes, but I just want to make sure it's going to take care of our guys.
That's how it was designed. It was designed for that.
I've read through this thing with a fine tooth. Have you seen the commercials for Prop 27?
If you,
I have, and I'm a paralegal. I read through this before I volunteered, and I praise this man and the 3 other people that wrote it, because it is one of the best cut and dry initiatives. I tried Prop 27. I couldn't figure out crap for that. I'm like, I need to print this out and just spend an hour going through it. But
So, I did talk to John Rohrbaugh, who's the chief in Alto Malones and Angels, about exactly what he would do. And now the thing is, of course, it's the board that ultimately decides. The fire chief will make a proposal, but clearly it would take the Alto Malones firefighters from being technically called stipend paid volunteers. There would be at least probably 6 of them that would get hired. And there's some possibility that there could be a medic in the mix too, because there's a lot of demand for medics these days, because it's a life-saving benefit if the ambulance isn't close And I don't know how he's going to do it because he manages. It would also open possibilities for a different model for the cooperation between Angels Camp and Altaville Malones. Frankly, Altaville Malones has been kind of taken advantage of by Angels Camp because it was a way inexpensively to take care of their fire needs without actually paying living wages.
And San Andreas, they just, I went to a thing, ceremony not too long ago where now they're getting $200 a day, I think.
We did increase the stipend, yes.
And I think Altaville possibly might be getting $100 a day now. So from 50 to 100, I think. But I mean, look at the.
Divide that in 24.
It's really harsh, yeah.
I just feel bad for those guys. They work so hard and they love what they do and they're helping our community and I just feel for them.
Well, I agree with you, ma'am.
I'm just like, what can this do for Altaville is what I want to know.
It would mean, my guess is that we would hire at least 6 firefighters would actually get real jobs rather than, now it's a crazy thing because I don't know how much you know about the staffing, but a lot of the same people will work shifts at Altaville that work in Angels Camp. Do you know about that? Okay, there's some unfortunate effects that if Altaville hires them that they might not be able to do shifts at both places anymore. It might actually reduce their shifts, but they would get paid fully when they're working at Altaville.
Is the state and county?
I'm sorry,
Because Angels Camp is considered state, correct?
Angels Camp is a city. I mean, yeah.
City. But Altaville is county.
Altaville is a fire district within Calaveras County, but it's not run by the county. It's got its own board and its own budget. So Altaville Malones is its own entity, and how it cooperates with Angels Camp is up to both the Angels Camp City Council and the board of Altaville Malones. For all I know, they might go their separate ways, but there's some real complex things that go on, and it's very unlikely that somebody could have a full-time job in Angels Camp and then go also have a full-time job in Altaville Malones, right? Because they're separate entities. So if they cooperate, in other words, because I know that some of the people work a paid job in Angels Camp and then they go volunteer in Altaville. Okay, this could change because it may be impossible to have, because then you would have 2 full-time jobs. And they do want firefighters to take days off and recover and have a life, and
Well, I know some do 2 on at Angels, some do it, and then 2 on at Altaville.
right, and then we're kind of getting into some, I don't know the details.
State law too, that let's say we have a paid guy who's here, 1 week, gets off, there's 4 days.
Right,
He's driving by with a terrible accident, legally he can't stop to help us as a
because of the state labor law.
state labor law.
Yeah.
Now, most of our guys,
So you're asking questions that I can't answer because I'm not a labor law attorney, but trust me, people will get hired if this passes. Exactly, the number will vary from district to district. We're getting on toward 8 o'clock, folks. You guys have made it almost 2 hours here. You are awesome. There's still cookies and coffee left, so please have a last hit run at that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Anybody